Manny Navarro with theathletic.com today with a featured story about the NIL and being in an all-star game, the high school all-star games. Of course, one of them is done. Another one is about to be played. And kind of what some of the blue-chip players have been saying about how much NIL came into play on their recruiting trips and also with their decision. And Manny Navarro joins us, Paul Craig and David Smoak on 365 Sports. Manny, thanks for your time. I love the story. I absolutely love the story. I guess our first question was, did you ask these guys like off to the side when you had them one-on-one, or was this a group meeting? How did this all go down?
Yeah, I tried to use discretion as much as possible. In these interviews at all these All-America games, usually the players are trotted out. They sit behind a table. Everybody comes up with their camera phones and their microphones and sticks it in their face. I kind of waited for them to finish, sort of the big wave and tried to talk to them as they were, kind of walking over to the next area, grabbed them for 3 or 4 minutes and just talked to them and told them, hey, look, this is really off the record. I'm not trying to get you in trouble or anything like that. And so a lot of the guys, they were fine with it and provided some thoughtful responses. Some kids were more into it than others, but it's the kind of story that I think we need more of in college football. A little more honesty about some of these things, right? We want to know what the truth is and what's really going on. And I think for the most part, I got truthful answers out of these guys.
On the other end of that, like you said, for the most part, it really felt, I'm just reading it. It did feel like there were people being genuine the way that they worded things. How nervous were they to maybe not be as completely forthcoming because they don't want to sound superficial?
Yeah, I think in some instances for sure. A lot of these kids, I didn't know them personally. I hadn't met them before in person, so a lot of them, it was, whether or not I knew them, I think some of them felt a little bit more comfortable with me being a little more honest because they might have known me from 7-on-7 or, some other events that had gone on throughout the year. But, the ones that didn't know me, I think were certainly a little bit more guarded with their responses. And I think, certainly, when I phrased the question, where does NIL rank for you, first, second, or third? I think they all didn't want to sound like NIL was the most important thing. But I still came away believing that, in all honesty, as much as money plays a factor now in these decisions, I do think that what they ultimately look for are relationships and bonds with coaches and the people that are going to be coaching them. I think that matters just as much as NIL.
Manny, you've talked to recruits for a long time. Do you get any sense, do you think it's harder now for guys, this NIL piece? Like, it's obviously better from a personal standpoint, even from a familial standpoint and all of that, the benefits, but does this make the process harder in your mind?
I think it does because certainly, there were some elite guys that I spoke to who said, look, and one of them, his responses in the story was, my parents literally got a phone call on signing day and my coaches that, saying, hey, we'll pay you $1 million to flip to our school. That's, I know the kid ultimately says he didn't take the $1 million and signed with the school he wanted to, but it's still one of those things where you're still 17, 18 years old. Somebody's coming at you with that kind of money. I don't know how you don't think about it, right? Like, how do you not consider that, that sort of offer at the last minute? So, I certainly think for some guys, it's a little bit tougher than others, deciding whether or not NIL has to take priority. But I think for the most part, these guys, they realize that a lot of this money, when they're approached and discussed with them, it's more about whether or not you're going to get it once you get there. Some guys obviously get fronted some money to come to the schools. I'm not saying those things don't happen, but I think a lot of them sort of look at this and say, okay, which schools really do pay, right? Like when they go on these recruiting visits, I think they really want to know who really does pay and how quickly do you get the money, et cetera. And I think that weighs into the decision a little bit more, not sort of a last ditch effort phone call.
Manny Navarro with us, theathletic.com and the NIL story. And what I did see was you mentioned the relationship with the staff. You mentioned the player development, which, of course, players are looking at. I even saw maybe a quote or two or something you mentioned where, yeah, there's NIL money, but the big money is in the NFL, and that's why player development comes into play so much.
Yeah, I think without question. I think a lot of the elite guys, when they're looking at schools and they're making these decisions, they're looking at, well, which coach puts the most offensive linemen in the NFL? Which coach, puts the most defensive backs in the NFL? Which coach has the strongest track record with first-round picks at this position? I certainly think that plays a much bigger role, at least for the elite kids, the guys that have NFL aspirations, the guys that are highly ranked. I think they want to sort of pair up with those kind of programs. I know for the guys I covered locally here in South Florida, where I'm based out of, a kid like Brandon Innes, okay, a 5-star receiver out of American Heritage, a can't-miss prospect, one of the best receivers in the country. He wanted to go play for Brian Hartline because Brian Hartline and Ohio State churn out these receivers every single year. So I just think there's a lot of thought process goes into that, certainly in terms of player development.
It does seem like a lot of the guys have the sense of, and I thought this maybe a little bit this past year with Arch Manning. Like Arch Manning knew that, look, he's Arch Manning. Wherever he goes, somebody's going to give him a lot of money. So it doesn't have to be about that because you are Arch Manning. If you are, a guy like Cormani McLean, who is, a 5-star DB, or like you said, Brandon Innes, wherever you go, you're going to get money. So why not wait on that and find out where you're going to be and then cash the check?
Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of the 5-star guys, the top 100 recruits, I think for all of them, they feel like they're going to make money no matter where they go. It's just when you get the outrageous amounts of money where you're hitting 7 figures. And again, I mean, these conversations that I had at the Under Armour game, I was having with guys during the regular season, when they were still playing their high school seasons. And some of these coaches tell me, yeah, their school's coming at them with saying they'll make 3 point whatever million. So to me, that's what you have to sort of weigh is if you're an elite kid, am I really going to be able to make that kind of money if I go to a traditional Power 5 that may not be paying that to go to another program that maybe, isn't winning, doesn't have a rich history, but is willing to fork out that kind of cash to get me to go. And that's not an easy decision for some of these guys. It really isn't. In the end, though, I think the elite guys ultimately say, I'm worth more than that. I can make that money. Being a professional player matters more to me than a quick payday.
Manny, one of the questions you have in there is about what advice these recruits would give. Was there anything particularly poignant or something that stood out that somebody said? There's a lot of great quotes and answers from guys, but was there anything in particular that you found to be, somewhat profound, if you will? Well,
there were certainly a lot of interesting responses. The one that kind of stuck out to me that made me laugh a little bit was a couple of guys mentioned it. They said, find out who you're really talking to on the phone. And they meant that because so many of these coaches, and I get it. I mean, these head coaches and these coordinators and assistants, I mean, it's tough to be texting and calling these guys all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe they have a secretary, maybe they have somebody in the football office that takes care of that for them. But a couple of guys mentioned that on several occasions, they were talking, to the head coach through text message, and all of a sudden they get a DM from the coach, and they're wondering, well, why is he messaging me through Twitter on DM if I'm already talking? So it was sort of like, okay, 2 people are talking to me, and I know it's not the same one. So that was just kind of funny, that pay attention to who's really talking to you, who's being honest with you, because it gets complicated.
That's I never thought about that.
I can see it, though, because you so often hear about guys getting texts all the time, and it's like, how do they manage in 24 hours to constantly be talk to 50 different prospects or whatever it may be? So that makes some sense, and yeah, that's smart on the players' part to figure that out for sure.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I took away is a lot of these guys really are smart. I think sometimes we think of high school athletes, oh man, they're being taken advantage of by these adults, right? I think for the most part, a lot of these All-Americans that I spoke to have a good head on their shoulders. That's probably why they're All-Americans. That's probably why they're the best players in the country, because they can see for themselves kind of what's playing out. They're smart enough to make informed decisions and to have the right kind of priorities when it comes to making decisions. Obviously, money is always going to play a factor, especially now that it's legal. You're not going to get in trouble for it anymore. So I think, it is part of their thought process. But in the end, what was refreshing to me was so many of these guys really prioritize, like you said, player development, relationships with the coaches, and that still matters in college football.
Manny, did anyone admit to someone on the staff offering them NIL money rather than at least guiding them where they should go?
I think for the most part, a lot of the kids I spoke to throughout the year, not just at the Under Armour, said the majority of the coaching staff that come to talk to them will mention NIL in terms of how much money their players are making, but they don't really talk to them about offers and say, hey, this is how much we're going to pay you. It's more about, hey, we've got these players. They make X amount of money at your position. This is what you could potentially get. But you need to talk to people outside the program. I think for the most part, a lot of schools are following the rules in that regard. They're allowed to talk NIL. They just can't specifically talk about deals and set those kind of contracts up. So I think those are third parties. And a lot of the kids told me when they were contacted and offered these large amounts of money, that it wasn't people that were on staff.
I wondered if there was anybody that was representing or was trying to get him to come to a school that the school did not recruit the player. Did you hear any of that?
No, I think for the most part, these are all, relationships that are established. You don't get a cold call out of the blue. At least I haven't come across that yet in the time that I've been covering, where a school just come out and say, oh, man, we missed out on this cornerback and we're coming after you here at the last minute, even though we haven't recruited you at all. I think there's always sort of some relationship established through the process.
All right, one more thing now. Of course, Miami last year, disappointing, 5-7. Expectations are huge because it's Miami and also the coaching change. You look around the ACC, Florida State's on the rise. Clemson, not that they've leveled up, but they're still pretty good. And then there's NC State, and then what Duke and Elko and Pittsburgh and North Carolina. Is there a concern at Miami that the hill's higher, a little bit of a higher climb than they thought?
I think I've come to form the opinion that Mario Cristobal, as much as he'd like to win, I don't think he's in a rush. I don't think this is, hey, we've got to bring in 20 transfers and we've got to turn this thing around immediately. The way he recruited, the way that they went out and acquired their talent in this last cycle, he made it a high priority to get elite high school players in Miami's class. And they signed a top 5 class. If they get Cormani McClain, it'll stay there. If not, it'll slip a little bit. But, I mean, the priority was elite high school players that they can develop and take time with. Yes, they signed a few transfers. They signed 11 transfers in the first cycle when he first got here. But I think, for the most part, his approach has been, this is a long-term rebuild. He signed a 10-year deal worth $80 million. I think he's going to have the support of the administration through this. It's not going to be, hey, why did you go 7-6 next year in 2023? I don't think he's going to have that kind of pressure if he goes 7-6. I think by year 3, year 4, he'll have to start showing some results. But I think for the most part, the way that he's approaching this thing is with patience, and he's trying to build it what he says is the right way.
Manny, do you think they'll do anything transfer-wise at quarterback, or were Tyler Van Dyke's issues more health-related down the stretch?
Yeah, I don't think they blame Tyler Van Dyke at all for the struggles last year. I mean, they felt like they didn't do a very good job protecting him. They didn't give him a whole lot to work with at the receiver position. There were a couple of guys who were banged up there, so it affected his numbers. I think for the most part, they're okay with going back into this next season with Tyler as their quarterback. But if somebody who is better than Tyler Van Dyke were to suddenly become available in the transfer portal, like everybody else in college football, I'm sure they would look at it and consider it and see if it would work out for them.
Manny, great stuff. It's a heck of an article for those who are watching or listening to us, theathletic.com. Manny Navarro and the story about the NIL and some of the reactions from high school players. This is 365 Sports. Manny, thank you. Happy New Year. Hope to talk to you again soon.
All right, guys. Take care. Thanks.